Your horse is not lost. If you
Cowboy cried when his horse was bitten by a snake, until an Apache woman said, "I have a cure." The desert did not breathe so much as it listened, and in that listening a man could hear his own ruin. Heat lifted off the red rock like a fever you couldn't break, and the sky was a hard, pitiless blue that made the eyes ache. I had ridden too far on too little, counting the slosh in a skin that had forgotten generosity, telling myself, one more mile, one more rise, one more lie a man can use to keep moving. The saddle creaked the way old bones do when they remember what it cost to stand. Cole, my gelding, the color of burned stone, took each step like he owed me, and I hated that I let him. I was 42 and tired of the arithmetic of survival, water, shade, distance, and the weight of names I no longer said out loud. The war had not only carved a seam across my shoulder, it had scooped something out of the center of me and left a hollow where prayer used to live. I told myself I was done with banners, done with orders, done with men who spoke about glory with clean boots. But a man can be done and not yet free. And a man can love a horse more honestly than he ever learned to love his own voice. We turned under a lip of stone where the shade fell in a narrow ribbon, a mercy as thin as a promise. Cole's ears pricked, then pinned. The sound came like dry beans spilled in a tin mechanical, sure, alive. I didn't see the rattler so much as feel the decision it made. The strike was a flicker and a thud. Cole screamed a ripped cloth sound that reached into my chest and tore something loose. He lunged and dropped. Dust boiled around us. I was on my knees before I knew I'd moved, my hands on his neck, my mouth saying, "Easy, easy." Like language could bargain with poison. 2 punctures bloomed above the fetlock, already swelling, already turning the color a man's eye refuses. Veins climbed like black roots under the hide. I'd seen death wear that pace before. A boy in a camp had reached for what he thought was a dog. We buried him before dawn. I pressed Cole's head into my lap, and the tears came the way. A storm comes to country that's begged for rain and forgotten how to receive it. "Don't leave me," I said, and the words shocked me because they were true and small and stripped of the armor I had worn since the bugles went quiet. A voice answered, not mine, not God, not anything I'd admit to if you leaned on me in a saloon. A woman's voice, low and steady, a melody that seemed made from the same fibers as the wind. I blinked grit and grief away and turned. She stepped out of the rock shadow, as if she'd been carved there by the same patience that made the mesas. Young, yes, but with the kind of stillness you don't get without burying a teacher and learning to go on. Her hair was braided with bits of color that caught the light. Her dress carried the geometrics of a people who remembered more than the map allowed. She had a pouch across her chest and a gaze that did not flinch from suffering. "Your horse is not lost," she said, "if you believe." Belief and I had been estranged. I'd traded it for habits that didn't argue back. But Cole shuddered in my arms and I was a man unmade. The gun at my hip felt ridiculous. I let it fall. "If there's a way," I said, my voice wrecked by sand and years, "do it. I'll believe." She kneeled by Cole's leg, unhurried in a way that did not disrespect time but refused to dance to panic's drum. From her pouch she laid out creosote leaves, mesquite bark, pale yucca strands, and a clay vial that held a slow, amber shine. When she crushed, split, sliced, and mixed, the air filled with a bitter, clean odor that made my eyes sting and my head clear. Smoke rose off a flat stone she set on a small, quick fire. The paste hissed and darkened. The desert's glare softened like memory seen through tears. She spread the paste across the wound. Cole bucked and I held him and begged again without shame. Then she drew a thin circle in the dust, with a red powder that glowed like iron at the edge of a forge. Her hands on my horse, her voice on the air, words I didn't know, and words I did. Life, strength, return. The chant made a rhythm my heart tried to follow, and for the first time since the strike, I felt something in the world lean our way. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway, to keep more Wild West love stories coming. She lifted her hands and looked at me. "The medicine can hold the body," she said. "You must tell the soul why to stay." I had not spoken to anything that could be hurt by honesty in a long time. but I bent so my mouth was at Cole's ear and told him about the night he carried me past men who wanted my boots or my blood, how he chose the rocks and the shadows, like a general chooses ground. I told him how I slept on him and not the earth, the month after the letter came with my brother's name folded inside. I told him I needed him because I did. Taya, that would be her name, hummed low, and the sound seemed to stitch my words into the air like a seam that might hold. Cole's breathing stumbled, then lengthened. The tremors dulled to waves. I let go of the breath I'd been strangling and dared to meet the woman's eyes. "I'm Jim," I said. "Taya," she answered. "We wait." Then we waited the way soldiers wait the clock useless. The sky, a map of omens you pretend not to read. Evening bled copper into the blue. A hawk rode a clean line across the vault. Somewhere a coyote announced the business of the night. When Cole's eyelid lifted and the dark globe looked for me, I let my head drop to him and laughed the kind of laugh a man saves for the thing he thought he'd lost and finds still within reach. Taya refused the coins I fumbled into the dust. "Remember," she said, "we are not what the towns say." Shame rose in me like heat. "I'll tell it right," I said. "I'll do more than tell it if I must." We found a seep the next dusk, a wet thumbprint under the stone where green dared, and I washed the poultice and set it anew with the tenderness of a sinner touching a borrowed Bible. Cole took water in small mercies. His heart beat under my cheek, not right yet, but stubborn. I looked at Taya across the rim of the pool. The wind lifted the bead tails of her braid, and the smell of creosote hung about us like a vow. I thought then that maybe belief is not a thing you hold. It's a thing that, when you open your hands, does not fall. Days are a long road when you're walking them with a mark at your back. We didn't speak much of what came next, because speaking draws lines on the air that men like Rusk can read. We moved by ritual instead. Break camp, check the swelling, ease the wrap, thank the shade, count the water. Cole learned a careful step that respected his wound and my fear of it. I walked often to spare him and to feel the ground argue with my boots. The desert ran on in its old language of heat and hiss and blade, but I had a translator now. Taya taught me to read a plant's shadow for where its roots might find what we needed, to read the sky for the honesty of its promises. Her voice was not gentle so much as exact. I found comfort in a person who spoke like that. We were 2 miles shy of the ridge when I saw the first sign we weren't alone. A mesquite branch broke in a way that said horse weight, not wind. A shine in a wash that said tin, not water. Taya had seen it before I did. Her chin tilted, not fear, not yet, but respect for danger. "We're watched," she said. Lyle Rusk had a face men remembered, because it belonged to a boy who learned early that other people's pain fit in his pocket. Folks in Grindstone called him Lizard, on account of the way his eyes didn't blink when a thing should have been human to see. He hunted Apache women because the law had holes, and the deputy who liked to wear his badge like a mirror paid better than a mine. We were a prize if you didn't have to see yourself to take it. Taya led us down into a crease where the heat pulled away at night. Cole stood easier there, as if the earth had leaned up to meet him. We kept the fire small enough to be a secret, and I let my shoulder rest for the first time since the strike. That was when the shot came deliberate, and far biting a spark off the stone as a calling card. A voice floated. "Evenin', strangers. You've got something that belongs to my employer." I stood before I thought to. Taya's hand was already on my sleeve. In the starlight, her eyes were both mercy and command. "Not here," she said, almost without sound. "This ground is wrong for you." She was right. The arroyo that sheltered us would trap us if bullets came like rain. I kissed Cole between the eyes like a superstitious man and smiled into the dark where Rusk smiled back. "Come and collect what you think you own," I said, and we moved silent, into the cut where the moonlight breaks into coins and the footing betrays anyone who gallops blind. Rusk followed because cruelty makes a man brave when he thinks the world agrees with him. He brought 2 others a laugh I'd heard in saloons, that emptied when the wrong hand touched a shoulder, and a silence that told me the third man wasn't a talker but a shooter. I took the bend left and let my feet find the proof I needed. Loose shale, a lip of limestone, a black bush that would hide a man and reveal a horse. Taya pressed her palm flat to the bank, listening to the way sound traveled through earth. "Here," she breathed, and it was a command as sure as any officer ever gave me. The first rider came fast into the blind. I didn't shoot the horse. A man who ever loved an animal can't do it, even when fear argues. I aimed for the rock above his hat brim, and the crack turned his brave into confusion. He grabbed leather and the mount twisted. Both went down. The second man fired wild and found only night. Rusk didn't waste bullets. He slid down, cat-footed, and I felt the old training wake up in my bones. You can hate the uniform and still remember how to live through a moment like this. We danced in the cut, me with the ridge, him with the angle, each of us measuring the other's willingness to bleed. The shot he put into my shoulder was light compared to the memory that lived there. It buckled my arm, and I tasted metal. I heard Taya somewhere behind me, her chant not as song now, but as a line she drew across the air to separate the living from the dead. Then Cole screamed the sound of a horse that remembers pain and refuses it, and the sound did something to me that pastors warn you about and forgive you for if you live long enough. I went at Rusk, the way shame goes at a man's sleep. We hit the wall and the moon went sideways. He got the knife into my coat. I got my forearm under his jaw. We saw each other then up close, where the stories men tell to themselves can't hold. "This is a lot of trouble for a cause with no him," he said through his teeth. "Not everything that matters has a choir," I said, and we both reached for the same gun in the dust. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here. The gun went off somewhere, not in my hand and not quite in his. Echoes run strange in a cut like that. What I know is the second man chose to run, and the third lay quiet in a way that means a wife will watch the road and not see him. Rusk did not die. The Arroyo decided he should live with the new notch my bullet carved along his jaw. He crawled into shadow and swore by a deputy's badge. "Grindstone," he hissed. "We'll finish this like gentlemen with friends. Gentlemen don't sell people." I spat blood to prove I was still titled to the word man. We pulled back into the lean dark that gathers where two stone walls almost touch. The moon thinned to a coin's edge, and the wind in the cut felt like a mouth breathing against my cheek, hot, then cold, then nothing. My shoulder burned the way old sins do when a preacher names them. Taya's hand found the place without asking permission. She pressed, not gentle but correct, like someone sounding a bell to be sure it still rang. The pain cleared my head in a hurry. "Hold," she said, and it wasn't a suggestion. I held. Cole stood above us with his front feet planted wide, reading our fear the way a horse reads weather. He snorted at the dust, ears swiveling, a living weather vane for trouble. I laid my good palm against his cannon bone and felt the tremor there, small and steady as a prayer you don't brag about. The poultice on his bad leg had dried into a crust that smelled like the desert after rain, sharp, clean, a word for beginning. Rusk's retreat sounded like a promise he hadn't learned to keep. Gravel skittered. A man cursed the way a boy does when he realizes fists won't finish what his mouth started. Then quiet, the kind that makes you count your breaths to prove the world hasn't ended. We moved at dawn, not because we trusted light, but because men like Rusk did. The horizon bled from iron to rose, and then to the washed bone of day. Taya tore my shirt with a clean, simple motion, angled the cloth under my arm, and set the binding with a strip of yucca fiber that clung like a vow. She chewed a bitter leaf, spat the paste onto her fingers, and rubbed it into the puncture where the bullet had kissed and run. The taste crawled up the back of my throat as if my body meant to share her medicine whether I asked or not. "You'll keep the arm," she said, "if you behave." I nodded like a horse that knows the bit is right even when it chafes. I have misbehaved with less reason and worse outcomes. Under the junipers, while the day tried to remember heat, we sat and let our chests find an honest pace. Shade puddled around our boots. A cicada started up the way a drunk tunes a fiddle and then, remembering the song, played it true. Taya's voice carried low, without decoration, telling me what the army men did with numbers and how numbers lie. At San Carlos they counted heads, not histories. They stacked bodies in rations and called it policy. They wrote down births and deaths in the same ink and thought the arithmetic of that page meant order. They forgot to count grief, which is the only tally that ever changes a man. Her grandmother had sewn with bone needles and the patience of centuries. "You stitch a wound the way you stitch a life," Taya said, eyes on the bandage she was making out of my sleeve. Small, even, tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. She tied the knot with a flick that told me she'd done it for girls, for men, for horses, for herself. "And when you leave a place," she added, "you leave it cleaner than you found it. Even if the only thing you can clean is your own tracks." I did not tell her about columns of blue marching along river roads and the music of brass that tried to make slaughter sound civilized. I did not confess the part of me that had loved the movement of 100 bodies answering a single hand, because that part of me had not yet forgiven itself. I looked away because I had been a man who asked for songs once, and men had died because some officer wanted one. Cole carried me when he should have been carried. The irony did a small, mean dance at the back of my throat. I slid down and walked beside him to pay back what I could with steps. Taya let me choose that penance. Pity is a poor medicine, and she refused to dose me with it. We made camp in a pocket of stones that had the kindness to bend the wind. The place smelled of creosote and old storm. There, between the smell and the salt of tears that belonged to more days than this one, Taya told me what I already suspected. Rusk worked for a deputy in Grindstone who liked to wear the law like a costume at a play only he enjoyed. Apache women went missing from the edges of town. A man who asked questions found himself meeting the end of a misunderstanding. "I can ride around Grindstone," I said. The sentence sounded like the man I had been careful to the point of cowardice. Shame has a flavor, copper, dust, and a memory of a door you didn't open when someone needed you. Or, I said, surprising myself with the way the word walked right out of my chest, "we can ride through." Taya's mouth did not smile, but it softened. Permission braided with warning. "Through is a road," she said, "but we will not go to give him blood. We go to take the knife from the wrong hand." We scouted at twilight because it's the hour when everything pretends to be something else, and a man can wear his decision like a cloak. Grindstone lay sullen in its basin, the street a scar across its face. The saloon burned more candles than any church around those parts, and the jail's door wore iron the way a cheap man wears a ring too big, too bright, meant to impress a mirror. A dog slept under the porch of the general store like he knew better than to stand watch for men who had stopped watching themselves. Rusk swaggered down the boardwalk with a fresh bandage along his jaw, displaying the wound like a medal. The deputy laughed when he saw it, a sound like a tin pail kicked down a well, and clapped Rusk's shoulder with the easy intimacy of men who traded favors you can't launder. My arms gooseflesh the way they do when lightning claims a hill you haven't climbed yet. I felt for the place in my chest where fear and duty sit side by side and refuse to change seats. I don't believe in clean work when it comes to dirty men, but I believe in right ground. South of town, the Arroyo narrowed to a throat where the moonlight broke itself on limestone. A man who didn't know the land would come eager and leave humbled. We salted the choke point with small surprises. A bed of fine gravel that skated under a boot, a dry branch hung at a height that would make a nervous horse shift, a line scratched into dust where Taya's red powder drew a circle as thin as a blade. "Not magic," she said when I glanced. "A reminder." I thought of the war, not its speeches, but its maps, and wondered if I had learned something worth keeping after all. Night dealt the cards. Russ came with 2 new boys made of whiskey and advice. Cole shifted under me, favoring the leg but game in the way. A loyal creature is when he reads your heartbeat and decides to match it. "Easy," I told him, and he flicked an ear, answering like a partner who knew the steps. They entered loud with confidence, which is exactly how a trap likes its guests. Pride does a pretty thing to a wrist. It sends the bullet chasing its own echo. The rock slid where it was meant to. The first shot shaved stars off the rim. I put a round into a dead branch to shower them with splinters that felt like curses if you grew up believing, and like coincidence if you didn't. Taya stepped into moonlight like a word you thought you'd forgotten. The sling I hadn't seen her braid whispered once. The stone kissed the temple of the loud one, and he folded into himself, suddenly out of opinions. The second boy yelled a name that wasn't his own, and ran himself into the powder line. He skidded, flailed, and fired upward in reflex. The shot fractured against the rim and came down as rain made of sound. He decided to be a survivor and took off. Bless the ones who know the difference between bravery and stubbornness. They live to teach their son. Rusk found me at the center because we were built to. He grinned through the hurt. "You owe me a jaw," he said, "and a woman." "Lem. I owe you nothing," I told him. "But I'll pay you what you've earned." What happened next lives in the part of a man he doesn't throw around in stories unless he wants to hear himself too much. We closed. He smelled like cheap soap used wrong, like rage kept in a tin. My shoulder screamed at the twist he put on it, and I returned the lesson with a heel to his knee. We hit the wall and slid in dust that used to be mountain and would someday be mountain again. He had a knife that looked expensive in the way useless things do. I had the ground and a prayer I didn't name. "Quit," he hissed, breath sour with the lie he was. "You're alone." "Sometimes alone is cleaner," I said. Gunfire bloomed from town one, then 2 shots, then a scream that had a badge in it. Shame can shoot straight, and that night it did. A man in his nightshirt, one of the store clerks, I learned later had watched too many women look at the door that didn't open. He waited by his window, hands trembling, the way a boy waits to prove something to himself. When the deputy shoved 2 girls from behind the jail like he meant to move them to a quieter sin, the clerk raised the rifle he inherited from a father who'd taught him to kill snakes and not to enjoy it. The deputy spun twice and lay down and remembered how to be still. The echo of those shots wandered into the Arroyo and gave me what I needed. Rusk's eyes blinked for the first time since I'd met him, and a blink is a prayer answered if you're quick. I wrenched his knife hand into stone, heard the knuckles bargain, and then surrender. He clawed my face with the other. I tasted iron and dust, and the old shame that never leaves, but learns to ride quieter. Taya's shadow fell over us. "Enough," she said, and I believed she could make the earth obey if she asked twice. She did not strike. She did not gloat. She stood and altered the air with the way she occupied it. Rusk saw her and called her something that made my blood go hot. I answered him with the closest thing to forgiveness a man like him gets. I let him live to carry the shape of his defeat. I took his knife and threw it into darkness, where coyotes might argue over its usefulness. He backed away, stunned into honesty, and tripped over the limp boy Taya had stoned to quiet. He looked at me the way a thief looks at locks, and I understood the next few days of my life were going to include him. "Grindstone," he said again, but there wasn't much hiss left in it. He went. The night exhaled. We stood in that thin-walled silence and counted what we had not lost. I touched Cole's neck and felt a heart that still believed in me. I looked at my hand on his hide, scar over scar, and thought how a man is just a book of healed things, pretending to be a single story. We climbed from the cut as the moon tired itself out. The town met us with a mess of faces hung with whatever each one had brought to the day. Guilt, courage, curiosity, the relief a person feels when somebody else rings a bell you've been sleeping beside. Hats came off. A woman with white in her braids pressed both palms to her mouth and made a sound that stitched the last hour to a decade. She had a sister who hadn't come home. I couldn't meet her eyes long. There are griefs you nod to, not because you don't respect them, but because respect knows its limits. The clerk stood on the jail porch barefoot, the rifle slack in his hands, like he'd just realized what it means to be responsible and right at the same time. "I didn't aim to kill him," he said to nobody and everybody. "I aimed to stop what was going to happen." The sentence trembled but stood. A good sentence, the kind you can build tomorrow on. We opened the ledger on the deputy's desk, because sunlight deserves paper. Names, dates, amounts, notes in a tidy hand, as if careful handwriting could tidy sin. Taya did not touch the book. She looked at faces instead. "Clean," she said quietly. "Start with the doors." Women moved before men did. They always do when the work is urgent and ordinary. Someone offered me a chair. Another someone offered whiskey. I took neither. The day had a lot of looking to do, and I didn't want to blur it. Cole nosed my shoulder, and I let my hand find the place along his jaw, where a horse likes to be told the world still holds. A boy hovered with a broom like it was a flag. I put my hand on the handle with him, helped him push sawdust and shame into a pile. "You sweep what you can," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or to the part of me that needed work more than applause. Rusk fell the way a lie falls when you stop feeding it. Not dead. That would have made him a martyr in the mouth of a fool. He fell out of the center of our plans and into the margins where a man can be watched. He would gather himself and gather friends, and we'd meet him again. But not tonight. Tonight the town stepped an inch toward itself, and sometimes an inch is all the world has room for. Taya came to stand beside me in the street, where the dust looked honest for once. The sun pushed gold through the alley, and stopped shy of blessing us, which felt about right. She looked at the children pressed into doorways, at the men blinking like they'd been hauled into mourning by their ears, at the women who did not weep yet because there was work to set in motion. "You left it cleaner," she said. "Not clean," I answered. "Cleaner is how clean begins." Cole shook his mane, the sound like a rope pulled through a dry fist. I laid my palm on his scar and felt the future written there, not doom, not triumph, but a rout. "We'll ride," I told him, "and maybe Taya, and maybe the town, and maybe the boy with the broom. We'll ride the rim and tell it by doing." The church bell rang late, as if ashamed of its timing. Folks looked up and then back down to the ground that needed their feet. We did not stay for speeches. We had a road to take and a knife to remove from any hand that thought it had bought the right to hold it. We did what you do when the light is slant and the day is tired of excuses. We saddled, we nodded, we left the door open for air. Behind us, Grindstone inhaled. Ahead of us, the country opened like a book that might still have a kind ending if the reader earned it. I tightened the cinch and tested my grip on the reins with the ache in my shoulder singing its small, true song. Taya swung into her saddle like dawn climbing rock. We turned south where the Arroyo's mouth widened into honest land and rode without speaking, which is a kind of prayer men like me understand best. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." Grindstone found its morning with a hangover. The deputy's office looked smaller with the door open, and the ledgers on the desk telling the truth they'd been trying to hide. Paper never lies for long. It just waits for courage to read it. The ink shone dull and brown where the candle had burned too low the night before. Taya stood in the doorway, her shadow cutting the floor in half, and for the first time that town had to decide which side of it meant to live on. The jail's lock hung broken, not from fury but from finality. A wind came down off the ridge, lifted the smell of stale whiskey, and carried it toward the river, where maybe it would learn to be clean again. A woman at the edge of town who had lost a sister put both hands over her mouth and made a sound that reminded me why a man should keep his promises. It wasn't a sob so much as a remembering, the kind that hurts less than forgetting but more than silence. The street listened. The hammering from the blacksmith's shed stopped. Someone at the saloon door raised a hand to his hat and didn't know whether to take it off or hold it tighter. That's how guilt looks in daylight. A boy with a broom stood like a sentry and then swept because it was the thing his hands could do. The bristles whispered across the plank floor, chasing the same dust that had been collecting lies for years. I watched him, thinking that if every man started with a broom before a gun, we might not run out of clean places to stand. Taya did not bask. She tied her pouch with the same precision she'd used to mix herbs, as if neat knots could hold back the mess the world makes. She nodded once to the women whose eyes met hers eyes that carried both relief and warning, as if they knew healing is only the first half of survival. They didn't speak thanks aloud. That would have been too small a word for what they meant. When Taya turned toward the horses, the crowd gave her the kind of space usually reserved for holy things and graves. Cole stood squared up like the scar on his leg, was a vow he meant to keep visible. Sunlight caught the dark ridge of it, silvering the edge like a medal no one would award. He breathed deep, a sound between a sigh and a challenge, and I felt something in my own chest answer. I touched the place lightly. "We carried worse," I said. He snorted a sound that managed to be both agreement and complaint, the kind of honesty only a horse can afford. The air was still thick with all the words people had been too frightened to say. Doors cracked open, and faces peered out, blinking like they'd forgotten how to meet daylight. The saloon piano struck a few uncertain notes, and then went quiet again, ashamed of its cheer. Grindstone was not redeemed, just awake, and that was enough for one sunrise. We didn't take rewards or thanks. Those belonged to men who came late and wrote the story afterward. We took water, a loaf that tasted of rough flour and effort, and a few nods that tried to be blessings. I cinched the saddle while Taya checked the straps on her pack. The dust around our boots caught the early light, rising in thin golden veils like the breath of something forgiven. Before we mounted, I looked back once. The boy with the broom was still sweeping. The woman still stood by the fence, her hands now lowered, her face pointed east. The church bell tolled once, late and hesitant, as if remembering its purpose. I tipped my hat, not to the town but to the small decencies that had survived it. Then we rode out 2 riders, one horse marked by mercy, the other by will, leaving Grindstone to figure out what kind of dawn it wanted. Behind us, the dust folded shut, like a book at the end of a hard chapter. Ahead, the land opened clean and wide, waiting to see what kind of men we'd be when the next sun found us. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel, so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. We camped that night where you could see the San Carlos hills turn from blue to forgiving. The fire was small and the stars loud. I wanted to ask Taya to ride with me, as if asking could make it right. But there are lines a decent man honors even when his chest aches to cross them. She belongs to a people who have paid enough for other men's needs. So I made a different kind of promise in my throat where words start. I would speak her truth where lies had been cheap. I would be the sort of man a woman like that didn't have to forgive. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. We rose before the sun learned its color. The land smelled of stone that had let go of heat. Coal took my weight like a partner, not a slave. We rode until the light broke open, and the world looked briefly like it might forgive itself. Taya pointed to a ravine I wouldn't have trusted, and said there was water, if you believed the way cottonwoods believe. She was right, and faith is sometimes just aligning your judgment with someone who's earned it. I asked her name again because the air felt like it wanted to carry it. Taya Nantan, she said. I said it back, careful with the shape. She gave me a look that was almost a smile. James Holiday, I said, offering the whole of it like a hand. Jim, she answered, testing it like a bead on a string. A hawk cut a clean line overhead, and we both watched without pretending it meant more than flight, and still finding in it the thing people find when they need to. We came to a rise where the world opened like a book whose first page you remember and whose last you haven't dared. San Carlos lay beyond hard history, soft morning. I reined in because a man should not cross into another story without being asked. Taya stopped too. The wind played the tail of her braid, and the beads caught the sun like truths that don't apologize. This is where we part, she said. It wasn't a question. I figured. I managed. The word was smoke in a throat that had carried too many names the last few days. I'll ride the rim and tell it honest. Tell it by doing, she said. Words are good. Deeds sing longer. We sat the saddles a breath too long. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of things we wouldn't ask of each other. I wanted to say that loneliness is lighter when someone has seen it and not called it weakness. I wanted to thank her for teaching me that honor is a muscle you use or lose. Instead, I touched the brim and then my chest. She did the same, and that was enough. We turned our horses like 2 halves of a coin and started our separate circles that still felt like one. Before the ridge took her from me, she looked back, small against all that space, and lifted her hand. I lifted mine. The distance between us was honest and kind. Cole tossed his head, and the scar caught the sun and held it. I laughed quiet, full. We're not done, I told him. Not by a long mile. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, AMEN, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life. The desert held its breath like a predator that had learned patience. Heat curled off the hardpan in ghostly ribbons, blurring fence posts and far mesas into a single wavering line. By the summer of 1886, I had taught myself to live with that silence, the kind that settles in a man's bones and calls itself home. Dry Creek Ranch was a square of stubborn earth tucked against the Chiricahua foothills, nothing much to look at except to a man who had run out of places to go. My name is Cole Maddox. I used to scout for the Army, and I've got the quiet scars to prove it. A shoulder that drags when the weather turns, a lung that whistles in cold air, and a memory that wakes at the sound of boots in sand. That morning the bucket was half up the well rope when I saw them, two Apache riders on the ridge, straight-backed, no hurry in their hands. Men who ride like that don't come to chat, they come to change your life. The older one dipped his chin and said in slow Spanish, "The chief calls you. He is failing. He wants you now." I didn't ask what kind of failing. The wind already knew. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. We rode east most of the day, the sun dragging us like a mule that never learned kindness. Their camp lay braided along a low run of the San Pedro, fires sending up thin threads of cedar smoke. It quieted when I came through. Children stopped splashing. Old men put a thumb on their knives. A few horses set their ears like they'd smelled an old mistake. I went to the chief's lodge, and time moved slower inside. It smelled of boiled herbs and smoke. Kiatan had been a warrior big as a cottonwood once, a man whose laugh could spook birds off a field. What I saw on that blanket was a spiderweb version of him, thin arms, eyes that hadn't forgot anything. I remembered the first time we met. Winter crossing went bad. His pony went through ice, and I kept his head up till his people dragged us both out blue as the sky. He hadn't owed me anything. Still, he sent venison when it was lean, and word when it could save a man's skin. He studied me now like a gunsmith checks a sear. "You pulled breath for me," he rasped. I did not lose that in the dust. His fingers moved, slow but certain. "When I die, my 2 wives will have no wall but the wind. Take them to your house. Guard them, not as property, as life." The word hung there with the smoke. I kept my eyes on his, because a man should look at the weight he's picking up. "I'll keep them safe," I said. "That's my word." He blinked once in a way I understood and closed his eyes against the light. He was gone by dawn. The riders who guided me back didn't speak grief with their mouths. It lived in the way they handled their reins. When we topped the bluff above my place, 2 figures already stood at the gate like the land had delivered them. The younger, by a year fine-boned, watchful leather dress, worked with dust-colored beads, hair braided tight, was Naomi. The taller one, Taya, carried herself like a storm you learn to respect, cotton dress, road-worn, and a short knife at her belt. Neither looked down, neither asked permission. I said, "House is cool inside. There's food. 2 rooms unused. Now they're not." They passed me like water around a rock. That first night we ate beans and corn cakes in a quiet that wasn't unfriendly, just unsorted. I fixed the latch, stoked the fire low, and slept with the Winchester leaning casual against the wall by my bed. Habit, not threat, though habit don't care what name you stitch to it. Dawn brought work because days don't halt for a man's new promises. The pump squealed like a hawk with a thorn. Fence on the south run leaned as if it had been listening too hard to the wind. Naomi found the cornmeal and coffee without being told. Taya took the pump handle and learned its stubborn music in 3 strokes. We drank strong and said little. I watched them by not watching how Naomi placed her cup left of her plate, like someone who had learned to make room for a ghost. How Taya checked the gate latch twice with the absent-mindedness of survivors. Out on the south fence I pointed to the earth, and she saw what I saw, soft ground, broken post, the kind of sag that invites a thief. She took the auger when my old shoulder sang wrong and worked it without complaint. By noon, the sun had baked the skin right off our patience. Sweat carved dusty rivers down my arms, turned my shirt to paper, and glued grit in every crease. The air itself was a living thing, humming low like a beast crouched just out of sight. We sat under a mesquite whose pods rattled in the wind, dry and hollow,